As I struggled to find the right words for today, I thought I would look back at the first sermon that I ever preached here as your pastor. It was the first Sunday in Advent, 2018. Much like today, it was the start of a liturgical pilgrimage toward a high religious holiday. Only then we were looking at Christmas, and this time it is Easter. On that day, I quoted from Franklin Delano Roosevelt's first inaugural address from 1933. "This is preeminently the time to speak the truth, the whole truth, frankly and boldly," end quote. It was, and it is. In both cases, we were beginning journeys of which we could not see the ending, by paths as yet untrodden, through perils unknown. And maybe that is always the way it is with God's people. Maybe we are always journeying toward encounters with the divine. We are always on the way, always prodding each other to remember how God has been faithful to us in the past. So there's no reason not to trust that God will also be faithful to us in the future. Today's first lesson from Deuteronomy is a case in point. This is part of a very long speech from Moses to God's people as they're about to enter the Promised Land. Moses is describing for them a liturgy of gratitude that they are supposed to share when they arrive in the land of milk and honey. And he urges them first to remember their shared trauma, the wilderness wandering, and that following their brutal enslavement, which does not sound like a particularly joyful church service to me. But as these people reflect on the path that they have come through and how difficult it was, the harsh treatment, the oppression that they and their ancestors had endured, it begins to underscore for everybody God's role in their salvation story. God loved them. God heard their cries. God liberated them. God guided them and gave them hope and shielded them from harm. I think it's not an accident that this description of worship concludes with an encouragement to care for the immigrants and other marginalized groups. It's incumbent upon those of us who have come this far by faith to support others who are on the arduous journey. A wandering Aramean was also our ancestor. It is impossible for any of us to ignore the fact that Moses didn't actually ever celebrate this service with them. He never entered the Promised Land with that group. He did not enter the Promised Land even though they had been through so much together, had learned about truth-telling, about trust, about sharing, and all the hard way. Together, they ate manna in the wilderness, the manna which God provided for them in the lean times, even though the only way they could articulate what was going on with their experience of God's nourishment was to ask, "What is it?" Moses and the people took turns being aggravated with and disappointed in each other. And God loved them through it all. But sometimes people leave you halfway through the wood. Their shared road trip had been very important and meaningful to all of them, but there had to be a changing of the guard before the people could move into the next phase of their adventure. Moses had to step aside, and Joshua had to step up. It was not easy for either of them or any of them, but it was right. That first Sunday in Advent 2018, you were relieved that your search for a pastor was finally over, and you were reeling from the shock of learning that the future you had imagined for this congregation in partnership with University Temple was not to be. And on that day, I was compelled to warn both you and myself that I was not the promised Messiah who would make everything better. I told you then that we would have ample opportunities to seek one another's forgiveness for forgetting that significant fact. I'm pretty sure we can all check that off our bingo cards now. And since that day, we have been through some serious wilderness time together. We have known violence in our city streets and even in our building. Various floods and leaks and mechanical mishaps, not to mention all the misunderstandings and miscommunications. We have navigated budget concerns and the tricky world of technology, Zoom and live streaming and all of their complexities, which none of us actually understood. We even endured a genuine plague together. It's so biblical, isn't it? As we part ways, I want to humbly apologize for anything that I have done or left undone in my time here as your pastor that has ever made you feel less than a beloved child of God or has harmed this community in any way. And I want you to know that I forgive you for any of the ways that you have hurt me too. Let us be reconciled under that big tent of mercy that is God's grace. Let's give thanks for the times that we have laughed and created together, for studying and learning and visioning together, for champagne communion and brightly colored butterflies on Easter Sunday, for singing Silent Night by candlelight, for shared moments of understanding, hope, clarity, for shared food and books and effort, for prayers we have offered for each other and for the whole world, and for the music and care packages and offerings and videos and friendships that we have made. Though we are now headed down different roads into the wilderness, we can trust that just as Jesus was led by the Spirit in today's gospel lesson, we too will be led by and accompanied by God's Holy Spirit on the way forward. No doubt we will encounter demons and temptations along the way. Not even Jesus escaped that part of the journey. And as was the case for Jesus, so is the case for us. The temptations will be mostly to trust powers other than God and to forget our true identity as God's beloved children. In that first sermon that I preached from this very spot, I delivered a message, one that God's messengers are so often entrusted to bring to God's beloved people. Don't be afraid. Or as FDR put it in that famous 1933 speech, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance. Don't be afraid. I urged us on that day to pray for a peaceful passing for all that needed to die, for the birth of new, vibrant possibilities, and especially for the courage to avoid operating out of fear. And I urge those same things now. Sometimes we will be afraid, and we will face many temptations, but the Holy Spirit is going to guide us through the tricky parts, is going to deliver us and empower us to act as God's beloved children for the sake of the world that God so loves. On this faith I will stake my life. As FDR asserted in the middle of a Great Depression, this is preeminently the time to speak the truth, the whole truth, frankly and boldly. So I urge us now, facing down a wilderness road, to speak this truth frankly and boldly. God is bigger than everything we fear. God is more compassionate than anyone here could imagine. God has dreams for you and is equipping you even now with all that you need to participate in God's dreams. Above it all and beneath it all and around it all, God promises to be with us on the way. So I leave you with this blessing that a colleague of mine shared with me. May the wild and dangerous Jesus continue to ruin your life. May it be so.